Welcome to my little corner, and welcome to Imagine Sierra Leone Talk Show, the show that will bring you far-reaching conversations about hard problems, big dreams, big ideas, and conspiracy theories about life, events, and issues in Sierra Leone. I'm Albert Makoti, and joining me today is Dr. Joseph J. Bangura, and we'll be talking about one of his books, The Temne of Sierra Leone, African Agency in the Making of a British Colony. Very fascinating. So make sure you listen right through to the end. My guest today is Dr. Joseph J. Bangura, a professor of history at Kalamazoo College in Michigan, USA. He's the chair of the History Department and director of African Studies Program. He's a graduate from the University of Sierra Leone and Dalhousie University in Canada. Professor, thank you for joining me here today.
Thank you, Albert. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, and you have been. Yes, go on.
I just would like to correct now that I have handed over as chair of the history department. So as of now, I'm no more chair, but I am still director of African Studies.
Perfect. Good to know. Yeah. Good to know.
Okay.
Yeah. So you have written many books and many editorials on the history of Sierra Leone and Africa in general. And one of your books, The Temne of Sierra Leone, African Agency in the Making of a British Colony. It's a very interesting book, and I want us to discuss more about this book. And so why did you write this book?
Okay. I wrote this book. The book came to fruition after a lot of years of research. I never thought I was going to write a book that would be fashion that would fashion around this particular thesis, which is the Temne of Sierra Leone. When I was in grad school in my master's thesis, I wrote about the Creoles of Sierra Leone. I undertook an intellectual historical analysis of their history. Partially because of my background, my mom is Creole, my dad is Temne. So I became fascinated by that. And I was able to discover during the course of my research that identity as it relates to Sierra Leone, it's complex. And we try sometimes as Sierra Leoneans, or even overall as Africans, to just create binary choices. You are either Mende or you are Temne. But the history shows that it's far more complicated than that. And until you get into analyzing all the factors, the dynamics at play, you will easily just buy that kind of, you can easily buy into that binary choice. That yes, there are Mendes out there are Temnes out there, and so on and so forth. So I was able to find out in the course of the Creoles, when I did my master's thesis, that in fact, the Creoles never had a fixed identity. That we find it usually difficult to separate culture brokers' activity, the activity of culture brokers, from the people who are the players in constructing their history. What does that mean? That we sometimes ascribe identity to people, either based on what we have heard, or based on oral tradition, or based on what we have been told about the people, and so on and so forth. And we don't get time. We don't usually find time to try to explore the dynamics behind such identity formation. We don't look at all the factors. Are we merely ascribing an identity to someone because the person says, I am so? Mm-hmm. Are you calling Bangura a Temne simply because, number one, he has a Temne sounding last name or a northern-based last name, and so you assume? Or are you attributing Temne-ness to Bangura on account of the fact that he speaks Temne, which is a linguistic consideration? Yeah. Or Bangura has told you that he's Temne. So I went into all these factors and I realized that there was a lot of ground shifting in the case of the Creoles. All right, so when I started my PhD program, I said, okay, I'm going to broaden this project out to look at indigenous, the people that we call the indigenous ethnic groups. You know, in Sierra Leone, we have a group of people that we say they are the indigenous ethnic groups, which can also be problematic, but we know what that means. And so I stepped back and then started asking some hard questions. You know, when we talk about Freetown, we are obviously of the assumption that Freetown was a Creole-based city, or as a colony of the British, it was merely a Creole-based colony. I mean, it was settled by the Creoles and so on and so forth. So I started asking questions about when the ex-slaves were settled in Freetown at different intervals. Did they have company? Did they have neighbors? Did they intermingle with others who were not ex-slaves? You know, and so I came to the realization that, of course, the history of Freetown as it has been presented is too reductionist. It's too simplistic in the sense that once you talk about the history of Freetown, you immediately equate it with the Creoles. Right. And so I decided to do an exploration of why is that so? Why do we have a very lopsided historical analysis of Freetown? Yeah. And so I decided to look at non-Creole contribution to the historical development of Freetown. And during my research, even though I knew this before, but I had no evidentiary proof to intellectually assert that yes, the Temne equally contributed to the development of Sierra Leone, if not in some cases more than it has been portrayed. So I realized that the literature, the historical literature on Freetown, the historical literature on the colony of Sierra Leone, underplays the activities of non-Creole communities that existed alongside those called Creoles. So that's what brought me to looking at the Temnes. Obviously, I looked at all other ethnic groups. I looked at Mendes, I looked at Locals, I looked at Limbas. These people all had presence in Freetown since the 19th century. But the preponderant ethnic group there was the Temne. Okay. They list the land that the British used to resettle ex-slaves. They had their own administrative structure. They boosted, you know, Islam in terms of population. You know, they contributed to the informal economy because they had more market women traders than other groups in the community. And I said, we can't just wave that off. We have to include it in the big story of Freetown. Correct. And so when you talk about Freetown, when you talk about the history of Freetown, you cannot just easily equate it with those called Creoles.
So how did you collect your qualitative and quantitative data? Because you use a lot of sources to come up to this conclusion.
Yes, well, it took me about 9 years doing the research for this book.
Wow.
And so, obviously, I visited Freetown in 2003. This was when I was still doing my doctorate degree, my doctorate research. I spent long hours in the Freetown archives, you know, and it was a very arduous task, you know, to try to locate all the documents that were amassed during the colonial period. So I was able to get help from the guy who worked in the archives then. So he helped me a lot in locating some of the files. And then, of course, I went to the Sierra Leone. I went to the library, to the Fobe College Library. I went to the Sierra Leone collection. I spent long hours there. And then I decided that because of the nature of the various topics I was dealing with under this particular heading, there were not documentary evidence for some of the activities. And so I realized that some of the events I was describing and the associations I was describing, the founding members were still alive.
Ah.
And I said, well, this is perfectly rich. This is a gold mine. I mean, if I'm talking about cultural associations, popular culture, you know, for example, the Ambassador, you know, the Almania, and the Nurujinati, you know, the Boys London. I said, okay, let me see if I can track down these people. And so I was very fortunate to be introduced to a woman who was 99 years old or about 100 years old at the time. And so I interviewed her. The day I was introduced to her, I decided to conduct an interview with her. Why? Because I was afraid that she was so old, you know, I could not be opportune, and I would not have the opportunity to interview her again. So I interviewed her that day, and then she told me I could come back the next day. So I kept going, you know, until I got all that I think I wanted at that point in time. And she helped me a lot, especially when it comes to the gender aspect. I gleaned a lot of information from her. And she was the one that also pointed me towards, you know, other sources. She also recommended other sources. And so I started tracking these guys down. I tracked the guy who founded Boys London, who was a member of the Ambassador there. His name is in the book. And then I found the guy who founded the Temne Progressive Union, Yankee Camara. You know, in our Sierra Leonean parlance, when you say Yankee, this man a Yankee, it means this is guy who is a little ostentatious, you know, a little flamboyant, you know. So he still carries that name, Yankee Camara. So I went to him, Yankee Camara, and he told me that was the first time anyone had ever asked him about, you know, the history of Endeavor and the Temne Progressive Union. So, in short, what I'm saying is that it took me years to track down all these qualitative sources, both in Freetown. And at some point in time in 2012, I think, or 2010, I decided to visit the UK. You know, so I went to England. I went to the National Archives in England. Again, I was able to have a lot of materials. So I combined both the qualitative and the quantitative methods in extracting the materials that I had. And of course, when I was breaking down the statistics, I used the Sierra Leone Blue Books. These were all government books where I got all this data. And I had a friend of mine who was doing a PhD in statistics then that helped me quantify some of the things I was trying to analyze.
Yeah, now I mean, you put a lot of work now. This book, it's very interesting for read. So I want to understand more about the Temnes.
Okay.
And how then can for be na Sierra Leone?
That's an interesting question. The sources that we will get, the sources that we don't see, state clearly say they come out from the northern flank, which is from Guinea. You know, then come out from Guinea, then they come through, then they come at the northern part of Sierra Leone, and so that did not really then stay. But then they move because the Temne stronghold, which is the northern part of Sierra Leone, especially starting from now, Putloko, Makeni, of course, Putloko, Land of Kodemidede, but we're not going to all of that right now. So from Putloko now, Gambia, Makeni, you know, and then Lonsar, which are all very close to the coastal city of Freetown. The proximity of the central location, the central base, which is northern Sierra Leone, also gave them the advantage of reaching Freetown. And so they conquered the Shabu, them, if we can use the word Shabu. But anyway, they overpowered the Shabu. They don't use conquer. They overpowered the Shabu.
Wow, yes.
And so, yeah, and then they leave Nadakoya area, went to the like from Lompa, you know, all them places. So then leave there. Then of course, then come and what you call Freetown today. So then they occupy all them places. Then but now from the interland and come out from the north, and as I say, the proximity give them an advantage.
Okay. I got a friend where he refused for use the word Temne. He said the original word for be Temne. So
yes,
they always say,
totally agree with
Temne, Mina Temne, you know?
Yeah, I agree with them. Now Temne, if I come up from Patim, the original
Founder.
yeah, the original the original founder of I don't want to use the word founder, but the use of the term Timini could be traced all the way back to an old man, who was called Patim.
Patim.
Yeah, Patim. Yeah. So in followers obviously, and in admirers, they come for be called Temne. The people of the supporters and the people of Patim, So the original term is really Temne. It means Temne, But again, in the case of with colonialism, the British people and then distort some of their names and they either one because of the pronunciation within Yeri, or two, the pronunciation is so challenging to them that and then try for anglicize them in a way that makes sense to them, in a way they will spell it easily.
Yes.
So that's why in my book, me use what I believe saying that the linguistic spelling, THEI. In linguistics, THEI. Gave me not to linguist, but I just remember say I've been before big college, me linguistic, African linguistics, so I take, so THEI na te. So that make me use te mne. Now that misspelling. Some people then just say THAMNE. Well, the danger in that is that if you say THAMNE, you can end up for say tamne.
Yeah.
You can end up for say tamne. If you just say THAMNE, I mean, anybody can pronounce it anyway.
Yes.
But when you put THEI, it's difficult for like any other way other than Temne.
Interesting facts. Yeah. So what are the identity of the Temnes?
The Temne, their identity not Temne. Temne means I am a Temne, or I am a Temne. Okay? But the thing I want my fellow Sierra Leoneans to know is that identity could be invented or could be primordial. It could be invented based on circumstances where beneficial to the individual where they invent the identity. It can be primordial. It can be primordial based on blood relationship, based on originality, based on the fact that it's primary from the get-go. Na so ide, it's all kinship. Like Patim, in a primordially Temne. That's how he described himself. He's primordially Temne. It is in his blood. It is ancestral. It is primal. Okay.
Yeah.
But then the Temne ethnic group then they suffer from the double-edged sword disadvantage. You have a lot of people that they claim for being Temne. What's the advantage of that? It bloats the Temne population.
Okay.
Then they become the most preponderant population of Sierra Leone. As I said, the double-edged sword challenge. On the flip side of that, a lot of people that they claim Temne, they claim so simply because for social reasons, either the prestige associated with being Temne, or for economic reason, being Temne. If na APC in power, being Temne, it's like an insurance card.
Yeah.
You can use that for able gain jobs. I mean, before an escoma, and so on and so forth. So the Temne ethnic group, it gets certain principles. They they are very principled people from all the one that I don't talk to. They are loyal people, but they are also their sense of social justice is very high. The sense of social justice is very high. When that's what people usually just say, oh, to me, they like bush.
Yeah.
Or to me, they like for fetch. No. Now, one of them core principle that one day of social justice consciousness. And get that social justice conscious. So we will easily try for override for dismiss it in the man, even when in belief say it is on the right path. In other words, they don't let somebody just easily disrespect, dismiss, and take advantage of them. Now, the identity way I talk in my book, I talk say some of it is invented, some of it is instrumentalized. Why? Because in colonial Freetown, the first people that would be getting social activities, will be get them social events, now the Madingo them. We then talk about the Yankadi, Taransis, Yankadi. It's not going on. So what end up for happen? Many of the young men and women then begin to flock into the Madingo groups them. Because then one join Yankadi, the one join the Taransis, because you get for be Madingo before you join the Temne. And so the elders in Freetown, they realize that they are losing their own people. So the Madingo. So they have come up with their own social groups. Of course, because of their population, then get more social groups than all the other ethnic groups. And by the time you knew it, they had already outflanked the Madingo. And the young group become quickly more prestigious. And so then go the same core principle of saying you can't be a member of Ambassador or Almania or Boys London or Nuru Jinati or Aria or or Endeavor if you are not Temne. And so they were obviously trying to get back, the young men and women who are taking flight. Are taking flight to the Madingo Taransis and Yankadi. And so coming back, obviously a good number of them came back. But not only that, other ethnic groups like the Limbas, the Locos, the Sosos, not so much of the Mendes, a few of the Mendes, realized that the Temne social groups are very good. They're not only involved in organizing festive events, but they also became a social and economic scheme that began to help the people as well. So it quickly became very, very famous, quickly became popular, and quickly became prestigious for being a member of any of those groups. And so others now from other ethnic groups where they can't join, they learn how to talk to me.
Oh.
And some of them claim to be Temne. And so then you find it extremely difficult now for really distinguish between somebody where you go see like na primordial Temne, possibly way down from mama in late ancestors, but they speak and identify with Temne-ness from the person we just can't join them, but influence in them and we claim Temne. So that's the distinction people are finding difficult to make, except politics don't expose that. During Sheikha Stevenson time, that's not covered in my book, but during Sheikha Stevenson time, Sheikha Stevenson and S.I. Kuroma was a known Temne man, even though later down the road he renounced in Temne-ness. And so because of that, Temne had power. And you had a lot of marginalized groups at the time, like the Limbas, in particular, the Kurankos, the Yalonkas, the Sosos. These were marginalized groups because of their number. A good number of them learned Temne. Why? Because the northern part of Sierra Leone is Temne dominated. And the Temne culture is a very predominant culture. Anywhere Temne then go gather, then culture they quickly overshadow other cultures. And so that's why in the north you see Temne in the lingua franca. Parts of Freetown, Temne in the lingua franca, because of that dominance in the culture. especially the linguistic aspect. And so all these other people now, the Sosos, the Locals, the Limbas, they all became members of either Ambassador, Almania, Jinati, all these groups. And some of them became very eloquent speakers of Temne. And they blended in.
Yeah.
Well, the only time you begin to see this dynamic I don't describe so was when Major General Joseph Saidu Moma became president. And when he became president in 1985, shortly thereafter, people the way we they grow up, as Temnes, began to associate themselves, began to identify themselves as Limbas.
Okay.
Why? Because power don't shift to the Limbas. And so you see that you see that kind of development there, immediately see the identity of these people was always fluid.
It's fluid, yeah. Yeah.
It was always fluid and circumstantial.
So let's talk about the significant role that the Temnes played in establishing the British colony. So what have been this role where them play? Because we know when the slaves they return back, right? They get for buy this piece of land, Freetown. So what are the role where the Temnes then play?
The Temnes then play a major role. Number one, they enlist the land.
Okay.
So from that perspective, you go talk say they not be enlist the land. So maybe we'll not forget ex-slaves now we country today, where some people they call Creole. When we get issue with, and it didn't have a book. So the Temnes not enlist the land. That's number one. Number two, as the preponderant indigenous ethnic group at the country, they help in the areas of law and order. They help in the areas of immigration. They in the sense that when the British allowed the ethnic communities in the colony for form administrative units, by the census count at that time, the Temnes have the largest ethnic group. They were the largest ethnic population, second to the Creoles. They were second to the Creoles. And so the chief way the Temnes end up for elect, Almami Bobo, had more responsibilities than the one where the local they elect because of population. And so then work hand in hand with the British in terms of them maintaining law and order, because once the chief was effective in communicating, policies of the British, the principles of the colonial authorities, then they were able to focus more on other issues rather than always coiling down or coiling uprisings, riots, and so on and so forth. And so in terms of local administration, because usually people that talk about local administration just focus on the Freetown municipality. No, because these people were able to do that. And in few cases, in fact, other ethnic groups, and they come to the Temne chief, for settling their own disputes. And if you look at the book, you see the long line of Temne chiefs and the expansive role where they play. So in terms of law and order, that was very, very important. In other words, they also contribute to the success of the indirect rule system that the British people implement. Even though when we talk about indirect rule system, we focus more in the provinces. No. It was also in Freetown, but it was not called that. It was called local administration. It's like where you did California now, the governor of California, he get more responsibility than the governor of Wyoming. California is 30-something million people. Wyoming, a one great congressman they get. I think they are even under 1 million. So it was similar in the case of the thing. And then also immigration. There was a big immigration flow from the hinterland to Freetown. Majority of those were coming from the north.
Mm.
And again, as I tell you about the prestigious and the prestigious nature of the Temne associations that would form and the economic benefits many of their members enjoyed, when these immigrants came from the provinces, immediately they report to the various Temne communities. And so those called Creoles, whom they call Freetonians, and the colonial government were against immigration. The Temne ethnic leader, the Temne ethnic group leader, play a role in sometimes either apprehending these illegal immigrants, especially the ones them when are fugitives.
Mm.
But on many occasions, the Temne community, including the associations, they help for shield these immigrants coming from the provinces, and they help for provide, many jobs for them. In terms of trade, one of the prolific traders was this Mamiwe interview called Aja Sukana to Bangura.
Oh, yeah.
So she was able to organize market trading. And Inabi, a key member of the Alimania. In fact, she and Alaji Jubil Sise make Almania much more Islam-based.
Mm-hmm.
If you're gonna the Temne Mosque now, then get the Temne parish, the parish, the house society Temne Imam they live. Aja Sukana to Bangura was the one that suggested that they should not only build a mosque, but they should also have living quarters for the Imam. So she was also a wonderful, effective leader at the grassroots level. So when you look at all of those activities, then you realize that the colonial establishments could not have achieved that kind of stability in Freetown. Then they're not before able to raise taxes in Freetown without the help of the largest ethnic group in Sierra Leone. But most books where you read them, when you read most books on colonial Freetown, you hardly see all these activities described.
Exactly. Yeah. So the establishment of the British colony, it affect the Temnes, right? And how we affect the Temnes as a community?
Well, from the very basic, you can talk, see they lost the land where they dominate, because they leased a portion of that land.
Right.
Then eventually they permanently see them, then permanently give them up to the Brits, and a new community was born, and then the Temne activities became kind of secondary. The heavy focus was on the ex-ethnic group, ex-slaves, who ended up becoming Freetonians. Some people call them Creoles, but there is no documentary evidence for sure say them people they call themselves Creoles. So for describing himself like how Patim, they call themselves a mean Patim, and he described himself as a mean Temne, you don't get anywhere between 1787 to 1950, where you see people they call it a Mina Creole. The word Creole existed much more in the 20th century now. Then begin fashion around because they had multiple identities. Them people wouldn't they call Creole now, they had multiple identities. They don't go to one particular identity.
Yeah.
So towards the end of in the beginning of the 20th century, now they begin calling it a Creole. And at that they go with up to independence. And so two researchers, they now, come up with this idea, say, oh, now misspell that word. What they call them Crole. They probably meant Creole. Well, in history, it is either you have the evidence and you interpret the evidence, or you don't have the evidence, but you don't speculate. And so in the case of the Temnes, once they lost that land, all the focus obviously was on the Creoles. In fact, when they formed the Legislative and Executive Council, the Temne had to fight because the Temne were in Freetown, but they were not a member of the Legislative or the Executive Council.
Interesting.
Yeah, they were not. I think they were not recognized. And so, if you want to say they lost power, you can compare that to the Native Americans here. When the European settlers came, although it's vastly different in some sense, because there was no point in time where the Temnes were massacred or slaughtered. But I'm just trying to say, with the coming of the Europeans, you see how the Native Americans have been completely marginalized. In the case of Freetown, they were kind of marginalized in official quarters in some sense, even though the colonial establishment dealt with them. But they were not the core, they did not form the nucleus of the colonial colonial administration in terms of Western-oriented jobs. They were not the clerks. They were not the deputy postmaster general. They were not the deputy engineer in charge of this. But they contributed greatly to the stability of that community in their own local and in their own traditional form. So negatively, if we want to even use that phrase, it affected them because obviously they eventually lost the land and to some extent then suffer marginalization, especially when it comes to, especially when as it relates to Western education.
Okay. And you also talk about some of the chiefs, the leaders of the Temne communities, Naimbana, Bai Bureh. And most of the time for the history books, they read all, they talk about Bai Bureh, but always then they label Bai Bureh and the hot tax war. So I can always think, this guy now a hero or a villain? What do you think?
Well, number one, this stay outside me research, because my research more focus on it in Freetown. Even though I make some connections, to the hinterland. But generally speaking, it depends on the perspective it depends on your perspective and how you read the documents then. Bai Bureh was a local chief. And the Brits don't explain the reasons why they want to impose taxes on property owned by people in the hinterland. Now, the explanation was not clear. The frontier police, wouldn't be used, they were excessively arrogant. The colonial authorities also did not use any skillful diplomacy to make the message go through. So on one hand, the imposition of taxation or the imposition of taxes, for the development of the communities was a Western concept and was as colonial as the concept itself was. Much time, and when you read the Chalmers report, much time was not dedicated per se to getting the chiefs in the hinterland to buy in to this project. And so again, coming back to the earlier point I made, that the Temne's sense of social justice is very high. And so they rejected. So the foreigners, the foreignness of the concept of imposing taxes triggered, a violent reaction. So what am I saying? I'm saying from the British perspective, then go see the guy as a dissident because you have rebelled against established authority. From the Bai Bureh point of view and his followers, this was a foreign imposition of taxes on property that we owned.
Exactly.
So it's a very complex subject. It's a very complex subject. So it depends on the perspective. It depends on the perspective. Perhaps for help people try to conclude that as to get alternative views. Now, like we in America, I should say the government not just get up one night and say they impose taxes, then get processed with and they follow.
Mm-hmm.
Then go to write, then go to publish, then the state legislation go involved and so on and so forth. It's not like that it not happen like that in the case of the imposition of the house taxes. It did not happen like that. The communication was a problem. The arrogance of the officials involved was a problem, and the legitimate concerns of the locals that were dismissed was another problem.
Mm-hmm. And I also see like the Temne and the Mende chiefdoms they were unsuccessful in resisting the British power when it comes to this hot tax thing, right? That led to the war. So did the Temnes and the Mendes got along in those days?
The Temne and the Mendes have always been rivals. They have always been rivals in the sense that they've also fought some wars.
Mm.
You know, that's why you see that they get that frontier, that common frontier where you have Moyamba today. You know, Moyamba all the way go. I think Tayama or something like that. Yeah. So they always get that kind of ethnic rivalry. Okay. But the outbreak of the what they call them house tax, not a hot tax, because go call the oath of a chief hot. You know, a chief, no matter in those days, no matter how poor they were, I should say when they build chief in house, not to one bedroom no one go get. Now I mean they call them chief, now company they get. Now company gets. You know, those rooms were those huts contained more than 3, 4, 5 rooms. Mm-hmm. So the term hot tax is even offensive and derogatory. Mm-hmm. And so the house tax, the house tax crisis again was also perceived differently from the two major regions, the southeast and then the north. Mm. Whereas the Mende speaking, I like to use the word Mende speaking. The Mende speaking, because if I ask you now, Albert, you know what you say, Mende, I say, how you know? There could be long explanation.
Yeah.
You see that? So the Mende speaking region of the southeast then combined the imposition of the house tax with other grievances they had against the colonial governments.
Okay.
And so they decided that they are going to take down anyone associated with the colonial establishment. Whereas Bai Bureh, again, as I tell you, that sense of justice, sense of social justice, he restricted his attacks only on those he called the white people. Mm. So not that they coordinated, they did not. Not that I have seen. I've not seen any document that supports that. So on the basis of that, I would say they did not coordinate, but they were all feeling the same pressure of the colonial presence in their regions. Mm-hmm. And then the house tax war just aggravated it. The position of taxes just aggravated that situation.
So what is the one takeaway that you want readers to get from this book?
Well, if you say one, then I'll go for give you a long one.
So many, as much as you want people for takeaway.
Yeah. So the first point I want people for note is that the history of Freetown was not necessarily the history of the Creoles. Mm-hmm. The Temne and the so-called Creoles, and I don't mean for being insulting by saying so-called Creole, because I dispute the term Creole. The Temne and the Freetonians, I call them Freetonians because Freetonia is a much more generic and geographic, but the Creole is far more restrictive and cultural. And that's where the problem is, because you can't able to demarcate a Creole who claims primordial identity from a Creole who claim Creoleness through invention. So the things I want people to take away from this book is that the Temne contributed greatly to the socio-historical formation of Freetown. They were there right from the get-go. And their activities, though may have appeared to be marginalized, but their activities were equally as significant as the junior partners of the colonialists who ended up who were essentially the ex-slaves. So that's the one point. Two, I want people to know that when we talk about identity in Sierra Leone, which some people call tribalism, it's a very complex phenomenon that Sierra Leoneans, a good number of Sierra Leoneans, especially those in the urban centers, are good at instrumentalizing identity for social, economic, and in many cases, political reasons. That means, depending on the presidency, the occupier of the presidency, some people establish their identity around that. They claim identity, they claim to be a group, to be a member of a group based on the power dynamics. Madam Bio, we've heard he is Shabro. President Bio, we have heard is Shabro. But President Bio seems to be, so he's biologically Shabro, but he seems to be socioculturally Mende. Under normal circumstances, there is no way he could win election relying on the Shabro alone. Similarly, Ernest Kurma was dubbed as a Temne Limba. I mean, when he was in office, there were rumors that really he's local and so on and so forth. But he knew at that point in time that if he had come out from the get-go, from the day he became the flag bearer or the candidate for the APC presidency, or as the candidate for the APC party to run for the presidency, if he had declared that he was local, it is highly likely that he would have run into massive problems. And so he retained that aura of Temne identity. And so identity is very complex, and it's very difficult to determine one's identity without exploring the historical roots of one's identity. And based on that, because of the complex nature of identity and because of the fluidity of identity, it is time for us to begin to think that the issue of tribalism or identity is secondary to our Sierra Leoneanness, because people instrumentalize identity for their own individual benefits. So I want people to realize that at the end of the day, we should trump Sierra Leoneanness over individual ethnic identities. And then lastly, I want people to know that in as much as education, Western education in particular, is extremely important, it should not be the only royal road to success. Because once we focus on that, then it restricts people's path to prosperity. In the case of the Temnes, in as much as they were not the postmaster general, they were not the surgeon generals, they were not the engineers, they were not the lawyers in colonial Freetown, but the community leaders within the Temne community also carried respect. The tribal ethnic group, the tribal head, using tribal in quotation marks, also commanded great prestige and respect. The head of Almania carried lots of respect within the Temne community and even within the other indigenous communities. But we do not put too much premium on that as researchers and scholars simply because the head of the Temne tribal authority was not a member of the Freemason.
Mm.
So in short, education should not be, Western education should not be the royal road to success alone. There are other variables and there are other paths to prosperity, which as a nation, we should equally encourage and develop.
Well, thank you so much, Professor. This is a far-reaching conversation, and I would like to get you on again at some time. You did come up with new books. I see. Yeah, there are new books, right? Where they in the development right now, and we go left for talk more. And even in this book, we go left for expand on this discussion more with time. So thank you so much for taking this time out and out of your busy schedule for talk to us about this wonderful book, The Temne of Sierra Leone, African Agency in the Making of a British Colony. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the book is available on Amazon. Get your copy today. Thank you so much, Professor.
Yes, thank you too for inviting me. And I know that I want to let your listeners know that the book is now in paperback.
Paperback.
Which means it's way cheaper now. It's about $22. Oh. And if they want to buy a copy, they could. If they want to buy a copy from the publisher, Cambridge University Press, they could just mention my name, and then they will be entitled to a 20% discount.
Oh, wow. And that's all we have time for today. Thank you for listening. And you can learn more about Imagine Sierra Leone on our website at www.imaginesierraleone.com. We are on Facebook. Like our Facebook page. Join our Facebook group, Imagine Sierra Leone. We are on Twitter and we are on Instagram. And we also have our YouTube channel that you can listen to these discussions over and over again. And while you are on our YouTube channel, don't forget to subscribe so you get the latest from Imagine Sierra Leone. Stay safe and bye for now.